Richard Devereux stepped out of his custom Bentley, adjusting his tailored Italian suit as the valet rushed to take his keys. At 42, Richard had everything a man could want. A thriving international development company with projects across 3 continents, a magnificent mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, and a family that seemed perfect in every way. "Daddy!" 6-year-old Sophia ran toward him, her designer dress fluttering in the afternoon breeze. Behind her walked his wife of 8 years, Victoria, elegant as always in her cream designer dress and perfectly styled blonde hair. "There's my princess," Richard said, lifting Sophia into his arms and kissing her cheek. "And my queen," he added, leaning in to kiss Victoria's perfectly made-up face. Today was special. Sophia had just won her school's art competition, and Richard had promised to take the family to the exclusive Sapphire Terrace restaurant to celebrate. No expense would be spared for his little girl. Have you ever had a moment when everything in your life seemed absolutely perfect? When you couldn't imagine anything going wrong? Those moments are precious, aren't they? But sometimes, they're more fragile than we realize. As they entered the restaurant, the maitre d' immediately recognized Richard. "Mr. Devereux, what an honor to have you with us again. Your usual table by the window is ready." Richard nodded with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to the best of everything. The Sapphire Terrace was the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Reservations typically required months of waiting, but not for Richard Devereux. His family was escorted past the line of waiting guests, drawing envious glances. Victoria ordered a sparkling water with lemon, while Richard selected an expensive bottle of wine. Sophia studied the children's menu with serious concentration, her little brow furrowed in a way that always made Richard smile. "Everything is perfect," Richard thought, watching his daughter and wife. His mind drifted momentarily to his humble beginnings, the small apartment he'd grown up in, the sacrifices his mother had made, the scholarship that had changed his life. He had come so far, built an empire from nothing, and created the family he had always dreamed of. Their appetizers had just arrived when Sophia suddenly perked up, looking past her father toward the main dining area. "Mummy, that waitress looks like Daddy," she exclaimed, pointing across the restaurant. Richard turned automatically, following his daughter's gaze. Time seemed to slow as his eyes found the waitress in question, a young woman in her late 20s with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her uniform pressed and neat but obviously well worn. In that moment, the noise of the restaurant faded away. Richard's wine glass froze halfway to his lips as recognition dawned on him. Have you ever experienced a moment when your past and present collide unexpectedly? When something you thought was safely buried in history suddenly appears right before your eyes? What would you do if faced with a ghost from your past? The waitress hadn't noticed them yet, busy serving a table of businessmen several yards away. But there was no mistaking her features. The same dark eyes as his, the same distinctive jawline, even the same slight dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. Victoria looked between her husband and the waitress, confusion clouding her perfect features. "Richard? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Richard couldn't speak. His heart hammered against his ribs as memories he had spent years suppressing came flooding back. Memories of a different life, of promises made and broken, of a desperate young man who had made choices that would haunt him forever. "Daddy, do you know her?" Sophia asked, innocent curiosity in her voice. "No," Richard said too quickly, finally finding his voice. "She just reminds me of someone." But his reaction had already given him away. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, her social smile remaining fixed in place but a new tension evident in her shoulders. "Excuse me," Richard said, abruptly standing. "I need to use the restroom." He walked away from the table with forced calm, ducking into a hallway out of sight of his family. Leaning against the wall, he closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. Couldn't be her. Couldn't be. Richard's mind raced back 12 years, to a time before his fortune, before Victoria, before the life he had so carefully constructed. He had been 30, struggling to get his company off the ground, working 18-hour days and living on coffee and determination. Emma had been 22, a waitress at the diner where he would grab his rare meals, always with her textbooks nearby as she worked her way through nursing school. Their romance had been intense but brief. A few months of happiness snatched between his endless meetings and her double shifts. When she told him she was pregnant, Richard had panicked. An unplanned child would derail everything he had worked for. The investor deals that were finally coming together, the future that was just within his grasp. "I can't do this right now," he had told her in the small apartment they had shared. "Maybe in a few years, when the company is stable." Emma had looked at him with disappointment but not surprise. "And what am I supposed to do until then? Put our child on hold?" "There are options," Richard had suggested, not meeting her eyes. "No," Emma had replied firmly. "I'm having this baby with or without you." The argument that followed was the worst of his life. Terrible things were said on both sides. In the end, Richard had walked out, telling himself it was temporary, that he just needed space to think. A week later, when he returned to talk things through, the apartment was empty. Emma was gone, no note, no forwarding address. Her phone number was disconnected. She had vanished completely. Richard had searched for her at first, but as weeks turned into months, his company had finally secured the major investment he'd been chasing. Success began to snowball. Within 2 years, he was wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. By then, finding Emma seemed impossible. Richard told himself she had probably moved on, found someone else, built a life without him. Eventually, he stopped looking, burying the guilt under layers of success and achievement. We all have chapters of our lives we wish we could rewrite, don't we? Moments where a different choice might have led to an entirely different story. What would you do if given a second chance to face your greatest regret? Richard splashed cold water on his face in the restroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The confident billionaire businessman had vanished, replaced by a man confronting his darkest regret. When he returned to the table, Victoria was watching him with concern. "Are you feeling all right, darling?" she asked, her voice carrying an edge of suspicion. "Just a slight headache," Richard lied. "Nothing serious." Throughout the main course, Richard found his eyes continually drawn to the waitress. Now that he had seen her, he couldn't unsee the resemblance. The girl had to be around 11 or 12, the right age, the same age his child with Emma would be. Halfway through dinner, the inevitable happened. The waitress approached their section, and Richard watched as she froze momentarily upon seeing him. The recognition in her eyes was unmistakable, followed quickly by shock, then a carefully composed professional mask. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady as she approached their table. "I'm Melissa. I'll be taking over for your server who needed to leave early. Is everything to your satisfaction?" Victoria smiled politely. "Everything is wonderful, thank you." Richard couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Melissa. Emma had always said she would name a daughter Melissa, after her grandmother. "Daddy said you look like him," Sophia announced innocently, looking up at the waitress. A flash of something, pain? Anger? Crossed Melissa's face before her professional smile returned. "Did he? That's interesting." Her eyes met Richard's, and in that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that this was his daughter. His child, the one he had abandoned before she was even born. "Do you have a daughter too?" Sophia continued, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "Sophia, don't bother the waitress," Victoria admonished gently. "It's all right," Melissa said, her eyes still locked with Richard's. "Yes, I do have a mother. She works very hard to take care of me." Richard found his voice at last. How is your mother?" Victoria's head snapped toward him, surprise evident on her face. "She's fine," Melissa replied coolly. "She's the head nurse at Memorial Hospital now. She worked very hard to get there, all on her own." The emphasis on the last words was subtle but unmistakable. Richard felt each one like a physical blow. That's wonderful," he managed. "Will there be anything else?" Melissa asked, her professional demeanor firmly back in place. "No, thank you," Victoria answered, watching the interaction with growing suspicion. As Melissa walked away, Richard knew he couldn't let her go. Not again. "Excuse me," he said once more, standing abruptly. "I need to speak with the manager about something." Richard found Melissa in the staff corridor, her back against the wall, eyes closed as she took deep breaths. "Melissa," he said softly. Her eyes snapped open, hardening as they found him. "You need to leave. Please, just give me 1 minute," Richard pleaded. "Why? You've had 12 years to talk to me," she replied, her voice a controlled whisper of anger. 12 years, and not once did you try to find us." "That's not true," Richard protested. "I looked for your mother after she left, but she disappeared." "She didn't disappear," Melissa countered. "She went home to her parents. Her name was in the phone book. But I guess looking up Emma Wilson was too much effort for a busy entrepreneur." The simple truth of it left Richard speechless. Had it really been that easy? Had he not searched as thoroughly as he'd convinced himself he had? "She never kept the truth from me," Melissa continued. "She told me all about my father, the ambitious businessman who had bigger dreams than raising a family. She never said a negative word about you, even though she had every right to." "I was wrong," Richard admitted, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "I was scared and selfish. And now you're what? Sorry? Now that you have your perfect life, your perfect family." Melissa gestured toward the dining room where Victoria and Sophia waited. "What do you want from me?" "I don't know," Richard answered honestly. I needed to talk to you." Melissa studied him, seeing perhaps for the first time not the abandoned promise of a father but the flawed man standing before her. "Mom is happy now," she said finally. "She remarried when I was 7. My stepdad is a good man. He was there for my first day of school, for my broken arm when I fell off my bike, for everything. He's my dad in all the ways that matter." Each word was another indictment of Richard's choices, another reminder of all he had missed. How do we make amends for our greatest mistakes? Is there ever truly a way to right the wrongs of our past? Or are some bridges permanently burned? What would you do in Richard's position? "I'm glad," Richard said, meaning it despite the pain. "You and your mother deserve that." Melissa's expression softened slightly. "Why are you here tonight, anyway?" "My daughter," Richard caught himself. "Sophia won an art competition at school. We're celebrating." "She seems sweet," Melissa observed. "Does she know about me?" Richard shook his head. "No one does." "I see." Melissa straightened her uniform. "I need to get back to work. My shift ends at 9. If you want to talk more, I'll be out front." It was more than Richard deserved, and they both knew it. When Richard returned to the table, Victoria was watching him intently. "Who is she?" she asked quietly while Sophia was distracted by her dessert menu. Richard had never lied to Victoria. Omitted truths, yes, but never outright lies. Looking into his wife's eyes, he knew he couldn't start now. "She's my daughter," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "From before I met you." Victoria's perfect composure cracked, just slightly. "I see. I didn't know," Richard hurried to explain. "Her mother disappeared when she was pregnant. I didn't look hard enough." Victoria took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. When she set it down, her hand was trembling slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Does she want money?" "No," Richard said, surprised by the question. "She doesn't want anything from me. She works here." "What an extraordinary coincidence," Victoria remarked, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "I need to talk to her," Richard said. "After her shift." Victoria's eyes flicked to Sophia, then back to Richard. "And what do you plan to tell our daughter?" The question hung between them, fraught with implications. Richard hadn't thought that far ahead. "The truth," he said finally. "Eventually, but not tonight." Victoria nodded slowly. "No, not tonight." The remainder of dinner passed in a blur. Richard couldn't taste the expensive food, couldn't focus on Sophia's excited chatter about her artwork. His mind was entirely occupied with what awaited him at 9 o'clock. When the check came, Richard added a tip larger than most people's monthly salary, though he knew money couldn't begin to address what he owed. "You two go ahead home," Richard told Victoria as they left the restaurant. "I have something I need to take care of." Victoria studied him for a long moment. "Don't be late," she said finally, taking Sophia's hand. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was permission. Richard waited in his car, watching the restaurant entrance. At precisely 9, Melissa emerged, now dressed in jeans and a simple sweater. She hesitated when she saw him, then walked slowly to his car. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here," she said as he lowered the window. "I'm trying to do the right thing," Richard replied. "For once." Melissa nodded slowly. "Mom gets off her shift at the hospital at 10. Would you like to see her?" Richard's heart hammered in his chest. "Does she know about tonight?" "I texted her," Melissa admitted. "She said it's up to me whether I want to talk to you." "And do you?" Richard asked, scarcely daring to hope. "I'm curious," Melissa answered honestly. "I've wondered about you my whole life." "I'd like to get to know you," Richard said. "If you'll let me. I can't change the past, but maybe..." "Maybe what?" Melissa challenged. "Maybe I can be part of your future," Richard finished. "Not as a replacement for the father who raised you, but as someone who cares about you. Someone who wants to make up for lost time." Melissa considered this. "I'll give you my number," she said finally. "We can talk. Take it slow." As Richard entered her number into his phone, he felt a weight lifting. Not disappearing, but shifting, becoming something he could perhaps carry with dignity rather than shame. "One more thing," Melissa said as she turned to go. "Mom doesn't know I work here. I just started last week to save extra money for college. I'm applying to medical school next year." "Like your mother," Richard observed. Melissa smiled slightly. "Yes, like my mother." The drive home to his mansion felt longer than usual. Richard's mind raced with possibilities, with fears, with hopes he scarcely dared to acknowledge. Victoria was waiting for him in their elegant living room, a glass of wine in her hand. Sophia was already in bed. "Did you talk to her?" Victoria asked without preamble. Richard nodded, taking a seat across from his wife. "Her name is Melissa. She's in her last year of college, pre-med." Victoria took a long sip of her wine. "She has your determination, it seems." "Victoria," Richard began. "I should have told you about Emma years ago." "Yes," Victoria agreed quietly. "You should have. I didn't think she and the baby were part of my life anymore," Richard tried to explain. "I convinced myself they had moved on, that looking for them would only disrupt whatever life they had built." "And now?" Victoria asked. "What happens now that you've found them?" Richard looked at his wife, really looked at her. Beyond the perfect exterior, he saw uncertainty, fear, perhaps even a glimmer of compassion. "I don't want to lose what we have," he said honestly. "You and Sophia are my world, but I can't turn my back on Melissa again. I won't." Victoria set down her wine glass. "I married you knowing you weren't perfect, Richard. We all have pasts. But I need to know there are no more surprises waiting around the corner." "No more surprises," Richard promised. "Everything else in my life is an open book to you." They talked long into the night, more honestly than they had in years. By morning, they had reached an understanding. Not perfect, but a beginning. In the weeks that followed, Richard met with Melissa for coffee, then lunch. They talked cautiously at first, then with growing ease. He learned about her childhood, her dreams, her fears. He saw traces of himself in her ambition, in her drive, but her compassion, that came from Emma. When the time finally came to meet Emma again, Richard was nervous in a way he hadn't been since pitching to his first major investor. She had changed. The years had matured her face, added strands of silver to her dark hair. But her eyes were the same, direct and unflinching. "You look well, Richard," she said simply. "So do you," he replied. "Melissa told me you're the head nurse now. I'm not surprised." Emma smiled slightly. "And you're a billionaire. I saw you in Forbes last year." "Money isn't everything," Richard said, the words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. No, Emma agreed. It isn't. They talked about the past briefly, acknowledging old wounds without reopening them. Emma had built a good life. A loving husband, a successful career, a daughter she was immensely proud of. Richard had caused her pain, but he hadn't broken her. 3 months after the chance encounter at the restaurant, Richard stood nervously in his living room as Victoria prepared dinner in the kitchen. Tonight, Melissa would be joining them for the first time. Tonight, Sophia would meet her half-sister. Daddy, Sophia tugged at his sleeve. Is your friend's daughter going to like me? Richard knelt down to his daughter's level. She's going to love you, princess. And there's something important I need to tell you about her. Families come in all shapes and sizes, don't they? Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that find their way together through unexpected circumstances. Has life ever surprised you with connections you never expected to make? Richard stood at the back of the auditorium, watching with pride as Melissa accepted her college diploma. In the row in front of him sat Emma and her husband, both beaming. Beside Richard were Victoria and Sophia, who now proudly referred to Melissa as her big sister. The path hadn't been easy. There had been awkward moments, difficult conversations, tears shed on all sides. But they had found their way to this new reality, an expanded family built on honesty, forgiveness, and second chances. As Melissa descended from the stage, diploma in hand, she caught Richard's eye and smiled. A genuine smile that reached her dark eyes so much like his own. In that moment, Richard knew that despite all his business success, all his wealth and power, nothing would ever be as valuable as the second chance he had been given. What would you have done in Richard's position? Would you have had the courage to face your past mistakes and try to make amends? Or would you have walked away to protect your perfect life? If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Zara's Luck Stories channel for more real-life stories that will make you think, feel, and perhaps see your own life in a new light. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our upcoming stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one.